Ju sfidoj të gjeni qoftë një deklaratë të vetme nga një përfaqësues i Bashkimit Europian në çdo nivel ku vjet në dyshim mbështetje pa lëkundur që kemi shprehur për reformën e drejtësi dhe arkitekturën e saj. Nuk ka asnjë në të gjitha nivelet. Në të gjitha nivelet ka një tregues të qartë se ky është një kusht i domosdoshëm për procesin e anëtarësimit. Po, e kuptoj pikpamjen tuaj se ndoshta pala amerikane po tregohet paksa e qetë, por në të njëjtën kohë, Shqipëria po i bashkohet Bashkimit Europian, nuk po i bashkohet Shteteve të Bashkuara.
Albania is joining the European Union, is not joining the United States.
Ambassador Silvio Gonzato, thank you for coming.
You're very welcome. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday as well.
Yes.
Not far ago we had Europe's Day, and more recently we had the European Political Community Summit, which was held in Tirana, and Albania's EU accession is something that still captures hearts and minds and is being discussed all the time. We have Albanian politicians saying Europe this, Europe that, and this is a requirement from the European Union, and they said, okay, we have this chapter now which really is going to break our backs because it's going to be so tough to go through that, and so the European mantra is always in their tongues and in our minds. So, well, the elephant in the room to start with would be like, why there is a European Union in the first place, and what is it about, apart from having 27 member states, etc.? What are we in?
Yes. Well, I could give you the standard answer. The European Union is a peace project. You know, it was born out of the ashes of the Second World War. It was the result of the realization that Europe could not afford another conflict of this proportion, and that the answer to that was to put together certain resources like coal and steel to make sure that rearmament would not happen in the way in which it had happened in the pre-Second World War period. But for me, it's become even more. I would say that the European Union is the decision by a number of countries that we want to focus more on what unites us than what divides us, because that's the only answer we have to deal with the challenges that we face today. And funnily enough, I experienced this personally in the later part of my life when I was in New York, and that's where I really felt that those differences that I perceive when I'm in Europe, you know, feeling Italian compared with a German or a Danish, and seeing how our way of approaching things is different, were completely wiped off when I was in America. And in America I felt completely European, and every time I met a European I felt a really commonality of views and approach. And that's precisely a little bit, I think, the heart of the European Union. I tend to look at the European Union not as a bureaucratic project. I think at the heart of it is this decision, this realization, and the acceptance also of the layering of identities that we have in Europe. You know, we are complex, and we started Europe Week precisely with this kind of debate. What does it mean to be European? We decided that it means complexity, but that allows us also to approach complex issue with this mindset, to understand that there is no black and white, that issues are complex and required articulated responses.
So was there any overarching conclusion or agreement, let's say, from these discussions during Europe Week, what is about to be European in the end? What is being European?
Yeah, as I said, we kicked it off with a discussion that was, let's say, nurtured by Federica Mogherini, who was, you know, former High Representative, now Rector of the College of Europe, which is, if you want, an academic body that really tries to embody European values. And yeah, that was it. It was the complexity that that makes us European that makes us understand better also the different viewpoints, understand better the positions that others have, and therefore gears us towards achieving compromises, which is something that sometimes is frowned upon. You know, compromise is a sign of weakness, but I find that this is a sign of strength. And this is what marked, for example, all my career. And actually, that's what I enjoy doing. It's really helping people find common ground. It happened when I was in the European Parliament for 24 years, where you really have to bring together a variety of actors. And sometimes you despair because you think that the starting points are so different. But we manage, you know, we always do. And in New York, it was the same thing, having, you know, the representatives of the 27 member states, you know, high-ranking diplomats, etc. And we had the convening power, and we were the ones bringing them together, making sure that we would find a common position. And 95% of the cases we did. Obviously, there are issues that are more divisive, but you also have to accept that, you know, we come from different backgrounds, and but fundamentally, there is unity in this diversity.
Apart the I say maybe in simplified words that the primary reason when you make most of the trade with your neighbor, you're less likely to put your tanks on the other side of the border, and this other more UN styled diversity and plurality and all these beautiful colors. Well, I think a lot of things have evolved from then to the point we are now. There is internal divisions, especially with the rule of law, questions and frictions about migration, the role of European Union in the world. We have a new US president, which is new, old new, actually, that doesn't appear to like Europe very much, and even in some international bodies which are interlinked in a way with the same legitimacy of human rights and rule of law, and how we approach diverse issues in the world today, such as UN and others, are being frowned upon. So we have such a novel, in a way, dismantling of some values which before were considered sacred. And there is some sort of disenchantment, and some may call it even loss of innocence. This point we are now, and how has this affected Europe as well? What are these challenges now?
Yeah, you know, I'm not a doom and gloom type of person, and I always look at the half full glass rather than half empty. Yes, the world that we live in is much more complex. If you look at one challenge that worries me a lot is climate, for example, and how rapidly this is changing, how rapidly this is affecting our lives, and how slowly governments are reacting to it. Well, then I'm proud to be European, because I think that despite the backlash, despite also some criticism towards the climate, the Green Deal, etc., the European Commission is staying the course, and President von der Leyen is staying the course. Of course, she has to deal with this reality, and that was very much the substance of the debate at the European Parliament. And I would like to echo her words when she addressed the conference of EU ambassadors. She said, we have to look at the world as it is, not as we would like it to be. And for years, I think, also at the UN, we've looked at it as we would like it to be, and preached that it should be in a certain way. We have to realize that things have changed. As you said, also the administration in the US is no longer necessarily an ally in multilateral fora, but we are consistent on certain issues like human rights, gender. We keep a consistent position, and I think that's what we should be doing. But at the same time, we got to engage. We cannot shut them off simply because they don't comply with our standards or don't comply with our ambitions. Because I also admit what you were implying before. we also have rule of law issues inside the EU. But that's why there are reflections now ongoing regarding the next multi-annual financial framework. You know, it's a technical word for the budget of the EU for the next 7 years. And there are discussions whereby EU solidarity would no longer be a blank check. You know, one of the fundamental elements of the EU is solidarity, financial solidarity, social cohesion. So ensure that there isn't, that we try to fill the social and economic gaps that there are between regions in Europe. But that comes with a clear requirement, and this is the intention of the European Commission that they want to put on the table, i.e. that you comply with the values that every member state has underwritten by ratifying the Treaty on the European Union. And I always like to quote the fact that the Treaty on the European Union in Article 2 talks about values. Market comes after.
I see.
Values are, right at the heart.
So would be maybe some repercussions finally for, let's say, not so decent behavior. Because, I think it was one of those Monty Python movies that say, I warn you not to do this, and if you do this, I will warn you again. So until now, this has been a kind of a mild inner joke even within European circles that maybe Europe is not that strong when it comes to firmly responding, apart from, the seriousness of language maybe, but beyond language.
I beg to disagree. If you look at the Ukraine crisis, the EU has not just warned them that they would warn them. We have taken very, very fundamental steps, and steps which would have been unimaginable a couple of years ago. The European Union has always been considered a political actor, not a defense actor, and look at the steps we've taken in that direction. You were mentioning also the change of administration in the US, which made us realize that we have to be much more self-reliant. Of course, these are not things that you improvise. It requires an enormous effort in terms of changing the mindset of people, because people in Europe are fundamentally, peaceful. They don't want war. So the effort that we're making now is to talk about, yes, rearming Europe, but with a view to defending our model of society, our political model, our democracies, not as an offensive, intention. So, of course, there are other scenarios, let's say, where the EU is much more hesitant, where there are clear divisions. We can look at the Middle East. I'm not here to hide certain issues, but this is not, you can't, wipe off the whole thing and say the EU is ineffective, because I think the EU is effective when there is, a common assessment of the situation and of the dangers involved.
The memories are still fresh when the invasion of Ukraine by Russia started in 2022, and the reaction, as you said, was swift, was very strong and serious, especially on the economic side, but also on other political levels, something that to some people looked a bit odd then, and I don't know whether it has been rehabilitated to some degree now, was that everybody from the Russian art scene and culture scene, including musicians, writers, name one, painters, they were treated like, they had suffered from some very dangerous form of political leprosy. Suddenly, they were kicked out of everything in Europe, and there were even some very weird op-eds at the time discussing whether Tolstoy should be taught at schools, at Chekhov. Of course, they had immediate backlash, but some time has passed, and we see how President Putin has responded to many of these people who actually came to oppose the war, raised their voices, and they were put to prison or suffered other consequences. While on the other hand, ironically, it was that the European institutions treated them with some degree of censorship, if we put it like that. Is there room maybe to view certain approaches that happened back then with a more let's say, flexible and realistic approach?
To my knowledge, there is no set policy in this respect. So I wouldn't say that it's the European institutions that have banned these people. There has been, of course, a lot of emotion involved. I remember when the announcement that Russia had invaded Ukraine came. It was during a Security Council meeting chaired by Russia. And everybody felt betrayed, you know, even the Secretary General of the UN, who kept saying, despite evidence, I can't believe that Russia will go this far, felt, you know, in a way let down and cheated by Russia. So there's been a lot of emotion there. I personally, now I talk on a personal basis, but reflecting also what has been our policy in the past, that regardless of what is the political situation in a country, and actually in cases particularly when the regime is an authoritarian one, people-to-people contacts are extremely important, and I think they need to be maintained, because it's the only way and hope that we have to nurture the coming back of a democratic society and to plant the seeds for a change in those countries. I remember in the case of Belarus, for example, we consistently have supported Belarusian civil society, fostered contacts with, also students, try to really ensure that they don't feel isolated. So I definitely, share the view that we need to do this, because one thing is a government, and another is it's the society, yeah. And we have to foster this diversity in society.
The former boss of European Foreign Affairs, Mr. Borrell, was critical recently about what's happening in Palestine, namely in Gaza, and he urged for stronger action from the side of the European Union, European Commission. And that is something that I think positions are trumped by the images. In a way, it doesn't matter what the position of a certain country or institution is. I mean, all the international ones, decent was from the UN to Journalists Without Borders, Medics Without Borders, name one, are saying what is obvious, and we see it through our pictures, through videos, and at a certain point, some individual reactions from individual EU member states have been strong and viable, but at an umbrella, if we may call it like that, position, we haven't seen much, and this is perceived also as a challenge when it comes to the so-called moral legitimacy of institutions, not namely for EU per se, but yes, of course, including that as well. And I think this is more than a challenge, it's also some sort of a moral test for everybody in the world we live today. And how do you think the EU should address it? Because it's also a challenge from the diplomatic point of view, because it's not one country that has its own sovereignty, but we have 27 members now.
No, first of all, obviously, Mr. Borrell is no longer playing the role he was playing before, and so he has the freedom to say things. But I think one can acknowledge the fact that the current High Representative, Kaja Kallas, has been relentlessly working towards bringing member states together. Because that's the conditio sine qua non. It's not going to change. We need unanimity to take measures. And she's been fostering in a consistent way at every Foreign Affairs Council a discussion on this to try and bring member states together. She's been very vocal in reporting what's happening in Gaza and calling for a ceasefire, calling for unhindered, unimpeded humanitarian access. She has, she's visited the region. So I think she's doing everything in her power to ensure that this does not fall off the agenda. Also because in a more global context, and I look at it from my experience at the UN, we need to be consistent, as you say. When the war broke out in Ukraine, the war of aggression by Russia, we were very, very vocal in denouncing, for example, the targeting of civilians. There is need for respect of international humanitarian law. So we need to be consistent throughout. And we've been for other scenarios. So it's also important that we do the same in the case of the Middle East. But again, we need unanimity. And if I look also at the future, I know there are people talking about, well, we would need qualified majority voting on these things. I'm not sure this is the answer. I think we really need to work together to be able to find this common ground, because foreign policy choices are one of the most important, relevant expressions of national sovereignty. You know, you decide who's your friend and who's your enemy. And to take that away or impose it through qualified majority, I don't think is going to work. Mm. So we need to work on this cohesion, and that's what the High Representative is doing.
Some may argue that do people really need unanimity or even a simple majority to uphold international law, for instance? So in this case, technically speaking, maybe a bit more philosophical, because clearly the EU works differently. But still the question remains, some things as...
But there are also countries not far from here that, also experience the same difficulties. So,
True.
It's not so easy.
True.
But I totally agree with you, the situation it requires urgent attention.
On the other hand, going back to the inner problems of the European Union, but where... in its own right, even countries such as Albania are a bit affected, or more affected. We have the situation with migration. So on one hand, we have this tension stemming mostly from populist political poles, which say they are coming here to steal our jobs, our wives and daughters. And it goes crazy and really bizarre sometimes on a rather sexualized level as well. They're going to steal our daughters and wives. I'm quoting former EU member states leaders and or even present ones actually going on that. While on the other hand, because of dropping fertility rates, there is a growing lack of human capital in terms of those who needs to do the work. So this is a bit paradoxical and a bit grotesque at the same time. So there is a growing need of people who need to work in the fields, in the hospitals, wherever. And on the other hand, we don't want to import people, although we are not themselves, I'm talking a bit in very, let's say, dry terms of economy, producing enough people. And that looks like a situation that, if not a deadlock, is still concerning, because if this populist, positions start to grow and to attract more support, then on the other hand, we have ever-dropping numbers of people.
Yeah.
The situation looks a bit difficult.
Look, I agree with you that discussions around these issues are not necessarily rational, but I think that the answer to them is not by dismissing these arguments, by pushing them aside and saying it makes no sense, from an economic point of view, from a demographic point of view, etc. We need to engage. Perhaps in the past we did not engage enough. And by the way, I also, it's not a problem of the EU. If you look at nations, like, for example, on the other side of the Atlantic, you have the same issues, the same irrational discussions. I lived in New York, and New York without immigrants would come to a complete breakdown. So this is a discussion that is happening everywhere, in fact, surprisingly. So we need to engage, we need to explain these things, we need to engage also with business, for example, because I think also in the region where I come from, in Italy, small and medium-sized enterprises would agree that without foreign labor, they could have a problem in covering certain productive activities. So we need this. We need to have also a mechanism that allows us to regulate the process, so that is not something that we how do you say in English, that we suffer from, so to speak, that is imposed, but it's something that we manage together with the countries of origin. And that's why the European Commission has always argued that fighting illegal immigration goes hand in hand with establishing processes and structures and mechanisms for legal migration. And this is shared by all member states. This is something that we have to work on, though. Finally, coming back to the issue of lack of rationality, I think this is a broader problem. And there I might be a little bit iconoclastic. When I was in Brussels, I was in charge of strategic communications, amongst other things, and I dealt with Russian disinformation and more generally disinformation and foreign interference. I think that we have not understood yet, but we are gradually understanding the impact that social media are having on our democracies and how totally accountable social media are towards democratic structures, and how extremely manipulative they can be when they are in the wrong hands. And I don't need to make any examples. I think you just have to look around to see how this is happening, how politics is being pursued through these channels. And you know, when I joined Facebook because I thought, oh, that's a nice idea. I can, share my pictures with friends and I can see where they are. Nobody explained to me that my data were being used, that were being monitorized, that I would be fed information according to certain algorithms that would impact my perception of reality. This is absolutely outrageous. This is a business model which is absolutely sick, if I can be very frank. So that's, again, where I feel quite proud to be European, because the European Union has been the only entity so far that really has started tackling this problem and actually setting the example for other parts of the world.
It's so true what you just said about the social media paradox, because on one hand, initially we were very naive, and suddenly, as you hear about these psyop stories and how they control our minds, even to the level of conspiracy theory with nut jobs having alufoil heads, etc. And suddenly it becomes so real, and you're there, and they are really controlling you. And it's true, actually, the EU has shown a very strong hand toward these corporations and in the ICT sector in general, from even the most basic consumer protection mechanisms, or let's say implants, such as using the Type-C charger. Everybody stop changing those, and to this one, which is much more complex. But to these days, something we perceive, especially in this side of the Balkans, we have also inner populism, which may not be on the
that's a different problem. Yeah,
far right things of the as we see in some EU countries, but in this our kind of populism. The EU is part of the populism as a promise, like we're doing the European thing, we're doing, the good Lord's job, but we're doing the EU's job here, and this is how we want it. And you see a high volume of this is being pushed even through our own social channels, and we're targeted, especially during electoral campaigns, etc. And recently, something though that cannot be amended even by this psychological processing of opinion, this processing of opinions, and how Aldous Huxley would have put it, engineering of consent through social media would not work, is something that some challenges we see at first hand. And especially being in a small country such as Albania, they are very easy to witness. We have spiraling depopulation, which some of our experts fear it may head towards a demographic collapse in a couple of decades, not so long from here. On the other hand, we are struggling severely with pollution, And that is something so obvious to see, and Albania has one of the, among arguably the most polluted river systems in Europe, maybe. And on the other hand, we have these EU conditions we want to meet, while being in a dire state, which on one hand we have to move forward and do some stuff, but on the other hand, the world itself, and this world, the population, which is a world phenomenon, is going to impact us on so many ways. So on a policy level, how could the EU help us at this point?
Well, first of all, one thing that I would like to say, and I keep on saying, is that the accession process is real. It's not something fictional happening on social media. And I remember also at the beginning of the campaign, we were asked by some journalists, how we related to the campaign that was promoted by the majority, the Socialist Party, that they could bring Albania to the EU. And we said simply, look, joining the European Union is something that enjoys the overwhelming support of the Albanian population and is a cross-party priority. So we will work with any party. It's not a question of this party or that party. But then, if they choose to make this their electoral manifesto, so be it, why not? I think this is the most important transformational process that this country can go through and will go through in the months and years to come. You were talking about, also how information can be manipulated in Albania. That's why, for example, we decided to engage with this media platform moderated by Professor Marcu and facilitated and supported by the Council of Europe, precisely because we see the media environment as a key element of the process, because people need to get the right information. There has to be independent media in Albania. There has to be also critical media, investigative media, dealing with the problems you're referring to. Just yesterday, we had a meeting with journalists from the main outlets here in Albania to promote green journalism, to raise awareness about the fact that indeed, yes, environmental policies are costly, but it's the wrong approach. They might be costly now, but if you look in the long term at the costs that these have in terms of health, in terms of loss of biodiversity, in terms of agriculture, etc., the immediate cost now, it completely offsets the cost that we will pay if we look at the future and future generation. We also have responsibilities towards future generations. We cannot just look at the here and now. There is, what about in 10 years' time? I wouldn't even say what about in 30 years' time, because that's too late. What about in 10 years' time? So, what can the EU does? What we do is not just tell Albania, these are the criteria you have to fulfill. Tell me, give me a ring when you fulfill them. We are constantly accompanying all stakeholders, all actors in this process, providing massive funding for Albanian stakeholders to reach these levels. So we have several projects also in the environmental sectors. Of course, they require time, they require political will, but we are definitely committed to accompanying Albania in this path.
Just as a parallel, not going to discuss specifically on another country, but just as parallel for what is something recent that happened here, something that was discussed long ago in Kosovo. It was about its lifting the visa regime for Kosovo, and something that went on, and in the end, it became clear to everybody that actually the problem lies within EU's Council of Ministers. Something coined like that. So basically individual member states had their own representative ministers of foreign affairs, and it is them who would actually call the shots. And it became clear to many that, okay, the European Union to its core is something beautiful, is handsomely moral, It really has some high standards and at heart, and they do their best to manage it. But apart from the European Commission, which is the sort of EU's government, there are these individual member states. They are the important ones. And now we had this European Community Summit in Tirana, and you would see some of the big players in this regard come up and say, yes, Albania is catching the train, and very soon you most likely are going to make it. And some were worried because they feared it was some sort of a carte blanche, that since it's a political decision, we want you on board, we really would love you guys to be in this train, maybe not in the first, cabins, but yeah, still there. And they said, so does it mean that no matter how we behave, the government behaves with their own citizens, with us, and how it performs, as long as it signs off and has this check boxes, at least the formal ones, is still going to have no impunity and jump in the train? What about our rights here in this country? Some people got worried when they saw this European leaders.
Right. First of all, you're totally right in saying that member states are ultimately those that take a decision. But they take a decision on the basis of assessments that are made by the European Commission. And these assessments, I think, as the Prime Minister himself says, are the best, most objective analysis of a situation in a country at a given point. So he accepts, always with grace, sometimes harsh criticism about the lack of progress in certain areas, etc. I quoted the media environment. That was one that of the sectors where we repeated over the years that there's no progress and we need to have progress, especially now that we opened the chapter, the fundamentals cluster. So yes, it's member states, and I think there we really need to intensify efforts towards projecting in the EU member states the image of what Albania is today. I'll give you an example. True corruption is still, diffuse. True organized crime is still present, not just inside Albania, actually outside, and that's how, we've seen Albanian criminal organizations involved in trafficking, international trafficking of drugs, etc. But we've also seen SPAC working closely, hand in hand, with law enforcement agencies from EU member states and dismantling quite a number of these organizations, seizing considerable amount of drugs, etc., etc. And this is a clear sign that Albania has put in place structures that can address, these phenomena in a serious way. And that's something that we should actually publicize even more. We had a discussion amongst EU ambassadors precisely about this, and some ambassadors were extremely appreciative of the work which is being done, also proactively by SPAC in cooperation with Europe, EU agencies, but also national agencies. So we need to proactively explain to European citizens also what Albania brings to the EU in terms of, providing, addressing these challenges, providing more stability in our neighborhood, because Albania is also a positive regional player, is looking at, at the past with the eyes of the future instead of the future with the eyes of the past. But at the same time, indeed, I don't think you can say that ultimately will be just a political decision. Whenever we assess the situation, we don't just look at the adoption of the law. We talk about the implementation of the law. We talk about the resources put at the disposal of that particular body or agency that has to implement the law. We look at the track record, and so on and so forth. So the assessment is, I think, quite thorough. And it's on the basis of that assessment that then the political decision will be taken.
So true, but on the other hand, some the same, let's say, skeptics, not EU skeptics, but skeptics about,
in general.
There are skeptics about Albania, especially, and our governments, in the plural, would say that Albania doesn't produce huge volumes of oysters or shoes or tractors or fighter jets. Albania's main production is regional stability. And this coupled with, I'm quoting Gjergj Rebara without actually asking his permission, and my colleague journalist. And with this in mind, having also in mind that the EU has sometimes been criticized for its stabilocracy, in a way, this marriage comes so natural. So as long as we behave well at a regional level, and we do our basic homeworks, and so we are in a good light because we provide good neighborly relations. We don't fight again with each other, and so you need us not to fight with each other. So in a way, there is some sort of, let's say, mild. It is mild, but there is worry that this approach, which has been very, very well developed actually and curated by our current government and Prime Minister, may take the upper hand as compared with actual reform, actual democracy, actual fight against corruption. That doesn't mean only by SPAC, but by all the state apparatus, where Albania is scoring very poorly on the other hand. Objectively so, through numerous reports.
I really don't share this view. Obviously, of course, and I saw it happening in New York. Indeed, Albania has acquired an international reputation as a reliable actor, also in the context of the Ukraine war. And that has contributed to an increased appreciation, let's say, by European leaders of the role that Albania can play internationally. But that's one thing. Of course, it's a positive factor in terms of improving the image of Albania. Another thing is, fulfilling the requirements and adopting the reforms and implementing the reforms. And that is something where we are absolutely 100% focused. And the discussions we have with the governments are tough ones, but in a way supportive at the same time. We are the only club, as I told the Prime Minister, the only club that tells you, these are the rules, but then we help you fulfill these rules. Because we sincerely also, and I personally feel, having lived in Albania for a year and a half, this is a European country that deserves to be part of the European Union. And so we have to help it become part of the European Union. But if we really want to help it, we really have to make sure that these reforms take root, have to be sustained. They have to be sustainable in the long run. And I think there is no appetite currently in Brussels to have member states that would not have these, reforms fairly and solidly anchored in their system. So this is a very intense work. Obviously, opening clusters is one side of the things, but closing them is another. And that's where we really have very thorough conversations, weekly conversations even, with our counterparts here in Albania as to what needs to be done. That's why I also started reaching out to the justice institutions, because they also have a role to play. It's not just the government. They also need to ensure the governance of the justice system, which, as you say, is not just SPAC. Ordinary citizens want ordinary justice. They don't, it's not just a question of high-level cases, etc. So they too have to ensure that the justice system is accountable, is efficient, delivers.
Mentioning SPAC, talking about SPAC actually, the Prime Minister has been giving mixed messages as we approach the end of this interview, and technically very, let's say, objectively so. When the mayor of Tirana, former mayor of Tirana, Velia, was arrested, he was literally fuming, and he was not very precise about what. And he gave mixed messages about the need to reshape the justice reform, and then he said, no, but we need to protect the justice reform. And one viable question may be, because we also must consider that the justice reform was very much supported, not only financially, technically, with knowledge and with whatever, but also in terms of protection, like security detail, if you call it like that, a diplomatic level from not only from the European Union, but also from the United States, which has been, used to be, very adamant and very, very vocal when it came to the justice reform and new justice institutions in Albania. Now, we do not have a formal ambassador in Albania since some time for the United States, and we haven't seen any true engagement, whatever, if we may say, at least publicly, it was zero when it comes to corruption, whatever, organized crime, justice, etc. There's been a dead silence on the other side of the telephone. Is there actual risks? Because this is something I personally share as well, my colleagues here share as a big worry, and I think most of journalists in Albania and some of the politicians that now the justice reform is endangered, because also relates to a certain degree to the lack of the other partner in the game. The US is not here, and some of us worry that the European approach may still be a bit soft. The worst case scenario may happen. For instance, they say, okay, we need another level to actually decide how the head of SPAC is elected and how SPAC takes its own decisions. Some may say maybe in the next progress report they say, okay, this was a step backwards in terms of justice in Albania, but that would be it. Does the EU provide strong guarantees to actually support this very hard achieved success of having let's say, a functional justice judicial institution in Albania, finally?
I challenge you to find a single statement by any representative of the European Union at any level where the staunch support that we have expressed for the justice reform and the architecture as devised in the justice reform is questioned. There is none at all levels. At all levels, there is clear indication that this is a conditio sine qua non for the accession process. Of course, you know, after 8 years, you might want to address certain issues. We have, for example, made it very clear in the context of the fundamentals cluster that we think that the system for appointing lay members of the two councils should undergo the same checks and asset checks, background checks that we apply for magistrate members, because we're not satisfied with the process as it is now. We think that it's too politically, you know, influenced too much by sort of the political side. This is one example. There might be other. These are adjustments, but the architecture is clear that is here to stay. If, you know, one wants to stay the course of accession to the European Union. And I think the government himself, and I was at an event earlier this week where the speaker spoke, is not questioning this. This is not on the table. Yeah, I take your point that perhaps the US side has been a little bit more quiet, but at the same time, Albania is joining the European Union, is not joining the United States. So I think you should listen also to the voice coming from Brussels. And the voice coming from Brussels, the latest one is the Rule of Law report that was published a couple of days ago, is very clear about this.
Ambassador, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.